What's up, everybody? This is Low Hanging Fruit. I am Charlie Marlow. That is Brenden Schaeffer. Brenden, how you doing, buddy? And we got some breaking news when it comes to Tommy Edman. So, first of all, how are you doing, Brenden? Though, tell
Oh,
me.
I'm doing. I mean, the doing couldn't be more done with where I am. Yeah, we're doing great.
Great. Okay, here's the news. Katie Woo. It's from 9:07. It's about an hour and a half ago as we record here on a Thursday. Katie Woo tweets. Tommy Edman has been shut down from hitting activities for a minimum of 1 week. He will not be cleared before opening day and will start the season on the injured list. Hashtag STL cards. I think we all kind of assume that. Don't you think some of these, is it prognosi? Some of these, it's like, I never expected Tommy Edman to be on the opening day roster, but I guess this now solidifies it.
When you say never, you mean like in December you didn't expect it, or like once we started learning about the setbacks, you kind of figured, this is going to take a while.
No, I knew all these things in December. No,
Okay,
what
got
I'm
it. Yeah.
saying is, and look, we could start this podcast now with the fact that in years past the Cardinals sometimes are too aggressive with with saying guys might be back. If you have the trifecta of Edman, Nootbaar, which happened after we recorded last week, and
Right.
Sonny Gray, I don't anticipate any of them being on the opening day roster. Now, they might miss a week or so, but to me it's early. The season hasn't even started. I don't expect any of those guys to start opening day on the roster. That's what I meant.
Well, and I think you're right. Like the news that we just got from the reporters that are down in Jupiter about Edmund is not too surprising. It is a little bit alarming, I think, that the reason they can solidify in saying he's not going to be ready for opening day is that they're shutting him down again. He's not going to hit for another week, and he never did progress to live pitching. It's not like he got to the last step of live pitching and he was feeling pain and they had to go backward. He never even got that far along. And this is a surgically repaired wrist. Like he had the surgery to fix the issue, and he's dealing with a lot of inflammation. Ollie Marmol, I think his quote said something like they've got to let it cool all the way back down before ramping it back up. But every time they've tried to ramp it back up, it's barking at him. And I don't, to me, that says, hey, you've got a long term opening in center field. Like that's the way you almost have to treat it. And anytime Tommy Edmond gets back in the first half of the season, it's a bonus. And that might sound a little bit, alarmist, but for me mentally, it's like, could it be June? Yeah, because until he gets to a point where he's actually progressing and not having this inflammation and this pain, it's impossible to say. Newt Bar, I thought it was a little bit wild when they said initially we're still hopeful for opening day when you've got cracked ribs, and that's typically an injury that's going to take a little bit longer to heal. And again, why risk it because it's the beginning of the year. So I agree with you on Newbar. I don't think he's on the opening day roster either. We'll see if there's any little nuggets that come out about him here in the next couple of days where we can get a better view of that. Sonny Gray is the one that I actually think does have a chance, but I wouldn't say it's a better than equal chance. But it's just dependent upon, like, he's already back to throwing and throwing bullpens and things like that. So as long as he doesn't have another setback, I think you'll be kind of cutting it close. I expect him to be pitching in that first turn through the rotation. Maybe you just bump him back from opening day. That's kind of unless he has a setback where I'm thinking about it right now. But yeah, the outfielders in particular, I'm just you don't know, especially with Tommy Edman, you really don't know.
And so we'll roll this conversation into Victor Scott here momentarily, but I think it also speaks to, we're all know-it-alls. I try to always give the Cardinals the benefit of the doubt, but as we've talked about this outfield glut over the last couple years, and let's be real, this could go back 10 years in terms of just, I mean, there's a lot going into that. Oscar Taveras, Steven Piscotty, Randall Grichuk, but like the Cardinals have been really bad for about a decade on either choosing or finding or bad luck with their outfield. And what I'm trying to say is, even after trading Palacios and Tyler O'Neill, I still kind of thought, they still have probably too many. You got Burleson, you got Dylan Carlson, and I think this does show all of us and know-it-alls like me. Here we are. The season hasn't started. Newt is probably not going to be on the open day roster. God knows how long until Tommy Edman. So you never have as much as you think. I think with pitching, we always know that, but this does show that because we're thinking, okay, is Burleson now going to start the year as a starter in the outfield? Is Dylan Carlson, who, let's be real, Nobody I know is really high on Dylan Carlson, and he might be your starting center fielder. Obviously, we have Victor Scott, but I'm just saying you never have enough. Is my point.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the challenge too when we say there's always a glut. It's like they've got too many and then they're not getting the most out of the ones that they have, or they're choosing to prioritize the wrong ones without really knowing because like, we certainly don't know. It's kind of their job to know and to get those decisions right, but they're just trying to go on the best information and beliefs, and last year it was kind of, hey, Tyler O'Neill's going to get sort of the benefit of the doubt to begin, and let's see if he can make good on all those raw materials and the great tools that he has. And it didn't really come to fruition for him. And now you're coming into another year after, as you mentioned, O'Neill is gone, Palacios is gone. So you've cleared the deck a little bit. Jordan Walker is going to be stationed in right field where you want him. But then the other two guys that you were planning on, Nootbaar and Edman, are at best questionable for opening day in Nootbaar's case. And in Edman's case, we now know he's not going to be there. So it is nice to have those other options. And it makes us feel a little bit silly for 3 weeks ago going, is Alec Burleson? I mean, they signed Brandon Crawford. I guess Alec Burleson's in Memphis. No, he's probably in your opening day lineup and hitting in spring training like he deserves to be. So it's a good point to be made that we oftentimes think we know everything, and things happen, and it completely changes our scope of vision on some of these deals within a matter of weeks, as we've seen this spring.
I agree. And I was one of those guys, but to be fair, it wasn't as much about Brandon Crawford as it was going back to Matt Carpenter. Because to me, you have the leadership guy with Crawford who also fills a need of backup shortstop.
True, but Paul Goldschmidt didn't ask for Brandon Crawford. He asked for Matt Carpenter. So
You know what?
we are.
What Goldie wants, Goldie gets. I hear you. Okay. So let's talk a little Victor Scott. So I always like to be honest with my audience. I haven't been locked into every single game, but here we
Nice.
go. Well, I'm just being honest. Hey, so he's played 11 games, 30 ABs, 8 runs, 11 hits for Victor Scott, 4 walks, 4 strikeouts, 4 bags, has stolen 4 bases. I mean, really nice start. 367 average, 457 on base, 433 slug for an 890 OPS. It's the Grapefruit League. I do think for a guy like this who entering the year, I kind of look at him a little bit like I did Mason Wynn last year.
Right.
Well, and let me change that. Mason Wynn, I didn't think there was any chance he was going to make the opening day roster. So it is a little different. I think with injuries now and the fact that Victor Scott has had a really good spring so far, he has an opportunity, and I think it's kind of the perfect opportunity for him. There shouldn't be a ton of pressure. This is because of injuries. Like they're not really counting on him because in theory, Edmund will be back, Newbar will be back pretty soon. But if he's good, if he's really good, he's going to play. So to me, it's a win-win for Victor Scott. What do you think?
Well, I think, and I've said I think they should have him on the opening day roster and that he should be the center fielder, unless we see Dylan Carlson catch fire. Which, to be fair, he hit a home run yesterday, and if he starts to put it together offensively, then I do think it's incumbent upon the Cardinals a little bit to say, look, we have sort of yanked this guy around. Yes, his ability to hit right-handed pitching is going to be everything for determining whether he can be an everyday guy and someone we can rely upon, or more of a short side of a platoon playing against left-handed pitching, which he's been able to handle historically. But if Dylan Carlson kind of doesn't have the spring that they're hoping to see, and that Tommy Edman is not necessarily coming around the corner very soon, Newbar should make it back before Edman, in my estimation. But he's supposed to play left field. Like the answer wasn't going to be, hey, we'll put Newbar in center and Burleson in left. Like that's not the best version of your defense. I think if you're going to have Burleson in left, which it seems like he's hitting, which is good, and he's trimmed down, he worked on his defense. Is he going to be a plus left fielder? Probably not. But can he be close to league average? That's the hope. Can Jordan Walker, with all the work he's put in, be close to league average in right field? That's a hope. But if you have two hopes on either side of you, I am going to prioritize the guy that can track down any ball in the gap, that has great instincts, has great speed. Victor Scott, to me, is the answer defensively. He's a match for what they thought Tommy Edman was supposed to be in stabilizing that defense for the pitching staff in center field. Dylan Carlson, I think, could do that if he's playing confidently. And part of what I think Carlson's thing has been is like when he's not confident and the team hasn't exactly instilled confidence in him, it's been kind of hit and miss with his production. So If they think, hey, he's looking good at the end of spring, we really want to kind of throw him a bone and maybe feed into his ability to show us the most of what he can bring to the table. Maybe then you don't have an everyday role for Victor Scott, and you don't kind of jump the gun on bringing him up. But if Carlson doesn't look like he's as good of an option for you in April as Victor Scott is to win baseball games, which I think is important because you don't want to get off to the 8-19 start you had last year, then Victor Scott would 100% be my guy. So yeah, I'm in a spot where I agree with you. He doesn't have to lead off. Look, he's leading off in spring. People might be getting this a little bit confused. He's leading off in spring because they want every possible glance at him that they can get. They want him to get the most at bats, the most opportunities in the field. They want to see what it looks like. This is a proving ground for Victor Scott. And so that's what's happening. That's why he's leading off. That's why he's playing center field every day, or whenever he's playing, that's where he is, because they want to see what that looks like. So for me, that's kind of what it boils down to is they're definitely taking a hard look at this. It's going to be a 40-man roster decision. It's going to be, start the clock, service time, all those things that historically we think the Cardinals are trying to be hesitant to do. But if he helps you win more games as an everyday player there than Dylan Carlson, and you can platoon Carlson and Burleson in left, I think that makes a lot of sense for the Cardinals in trying to start on the right foot this year.
And you can kind of do a little Jordan Walker from last year. You start him up, okay, what happens? Somebody comes back, you send him back down, you bring him back up. Oh, all of a sudden, maybe then you do have the seventh year of service time. But look, I don't I don't know that Victor Scott would be on the opening day roster, even if he had a great spring, if not for injury, right? Like if Edman and Newt were both healthy, even if he's
Wouldn't even be
really,
talking about it.
really good, he would make it an interesting conversation. Don't get me wrong,
Not
but I
even
don't think he
close.
makes the roster. Right.
No, it wouldn't even be interesting. It would be a great comp to win from last year, who had a great spring, and then you looked at the roster, and it's like, even with Paul DeYoung starting on the IL last year, there still wasn't any playing time for Mason Wynn, right? And then DeYoung came back, and it would have even been more impossible. A player like Victor Scott, 23 years old, regarded prospect. You want him to be playing every day wherever he is. So not only is it the injuries that open the door, it really is, to me, a lot of this is bakes into what Dylan Carlson is doing. Because if he's having a great spring, we're going, okay, obviously he's your center fielder. And then the other outfielder that makes the team needs to be kind of a fourth outfielder type who's maybe not a prospect that you're worried about. Oh, are we going to stunt his development by having him ride the bench 4 out of 7 days? That's Michael Ciani. Like that would make a lot more sense if you trust Carlson as your everyday center fielder and feel good about that going into the year. But if he's having a lackluster spring and Scott's having a great one, that would be the way that I would kind of view it and say, look, I think Scott might give you a better chance to win today and for the next 6 weeks, however long it is that Edmund's out. And yeah, I don't think it's the end of the world if Victor Scott goes out there and has a 600 OPS and doesn't really thrive offensively as your 9-hole hitter, and then has to go back to Memphis, where he's never been, by the way. We say back to Memphis, like Jordan Walker from last year. He's never played in Memphis. So that's part of the risk in like elevating him so quickly. But if he has a 600 OPS and then goes to AAA to refine himself, how is that all too different from last year bringing up Mason Wynn? His OPS is 470. And then you say he's our starting shortstop. Like nobody is thinking that they ruined Mason Wynn by doing that. That's not the narratives that are around that player. They say, oh, we think he's a smart kid, confident kid, and he's going to figure it out like he always does when he reaches a new level. I kind of view the kind of the swagger, the just the regard that Victor Scott has when he can think about the game and the way that he's spoken about with regard to the head on his shoulders. I feel like he can put it all together and find the confidence, even if he doesn't immediately thrive in the big leagues. And if he thrives, well, then he's here to stay. And that would be a great thing for the Cardinals. Good problem to have.
Yeah. I hate to say it, but at this point, I don't really have any expectations, and I certainly don't have any positive expectations about Dylan Carlson. To me, it's all he has to prove it. I know he's not having a good spring. And I'm not saying that 100% matters, but I do want to do the next little segment here about, in your opinion, which guys you think it does matter that they're good or bad? And I'll
Hmm.
start. So Mason Wynn, who we've already talked about. I do think that's a guy that you'd like to see better stats from in spring. And look, he's in 25 at bats, he's struck out 10 times. 200 average, 333 on base,
Yeah.
320 slug. So again, I'm not saying it's the end of the world, but that is a player that I think would benefit from a nice camp. It's so far not so good. You mentioned Dylan Carlson, he's got an OPS of 620. Now, here's a guy where, again, I would put Alec Burleson in the same category of Mason Wynn. Of I think a good spring is more important for those type of guys. And as I said, Mason Wynn not so much. Alec Burleson is having a really good spring. 400 average, 471 on base, 567 slug, OPS over 1,000. He's got a homer, couple doubles, and there you go. The opportunity is there for him, and it probably would have been anyway in more of a bench type role. But this guy, we've heard that the all the batted ball stats, despite some of the results weren't there in the big leagues, but the Cardinals have always loved this guy. He's doing great, and I think that is big for him. He's a guy where I think his spring numbers and his spring performance matters more than others.
I definitely think it matters for Burleson because, yes, now that there are two injuries to the outfield, there would have been an opportunity for him to be on the roster anyway. But they would have been trying to consider, like, okay, are we putting Donovan in left field, which they still may do with Burley as DH. But either way, I think both those guys are going to be in the opening day lineup. And then maybe Burleson's a bench bat, like you said, but he's forcing the issue. And last year, the Cardinals gave him a lot of playing time where some fans were like, who's this Burleson guy? Why are they so obsessed with Alec Burleson? And you look at the at bats that he takes, and I do think it makes sense. He doesn't strike out a lot, and he does put the ball in play. There's a really good hit tool there, and he's worked hard in the offseason to kind of put his body in a good shape. He's trimmed down. Can he find a power stroke within that as well to go with the contact rate and then maybe have a little better luck? I mean, Alec Burleson was hitting balls to the wall last year that were just like highlight reel catches against him on like almost a nightly basis for a while. It was kind of bizarre, and you just kind of throw your hands up. What can you do if you're Alec Burleson at that point? But I do think that there's a good tool there to be had, and he's a left-handed bat as well. The Cardinals have some mainstays in their lineup that are right-handed, like Arenado and Goldschmidt and Wilson Contreras and Jordan Walker. So having another guy like Newtbar would have been in that left field spot. Having Burleson there to kind of slide into that role is another way to balance the lineup really nicely, which some people say I don't care about, just get hits, which is absolutely right. But if you're a lefty, that does often give you a nice edge against right handed pitching, which is what you're predominantly going to see. And then I do think it works out nicely for a platoon because he's a lefty bat. And then Dylan Carlson, who's better against lefty pitchers, can kind of slide in, which is why I think earlier this week when we saw Scott in center and Dylan Carlson in left, thought that was kind of interesting. Maybe a little bit of a signal from the Cardinals that, like, yeah, they're wanting to see what this looks like and consider that could be an alignment that we actually see during the season. I think Victor Scott is definitely getting that type of consideration.
Okay, let's switch over to the pitching side. And again, I'll just throw some stats out there and guys that I think again for some it matters more than others. Zach Thompson is having a nice spring. I think it matters more for him. Matthew Libator, so 6 ERA. I did watch his first outing. I like him in the bullpen. I'm not saying he can never be a starter, but to me, I just think he trends better out of the pen. In terms of starting pitching, we know what's going on with Sonny Gray. Miles Michaelis is having a nice spring. Basically, everybody else in your starting rotation, not so good. Kyle Gibson pushing a 13 ERA. Steven Matz at a 12. I mean, this is only 3 innings, so I'm not going crazy. Lance Lynn, what has he got? 1 inning. So
He's only,
I'm sorry.
yeah. No, you're
Lance
right. He's
Lynn,
only pitched a little bit. Like,
2 innings. Yeah.
okay.
So Lance Lynn, 2 innings, 18 ERA. I'm not going crazy about any of those, but it's not a good start for a lot of the starters. So, what do you think of the guys I mentioned, or some other folks you think where maybe it matters more so to have a good camp for a
Well,
guy?
we'll talk about the performances, but first, you bring up Lance Lynn. Did you see Angel Hernandez ejected Lance Lynn from his spring training start? Like, is that not the most classic Angel Hernandez thing ever? And then because Lynn, so the deal with Lynn is he has worked his way up to a pitch count on the backfields, which Ollie has described. That's just the way he prefers to do it. It worked out for the Cardinals because they could showcase Thompson and Libby more as they kind of try to figure out who's going to be that next man up in the rotation. And so it worked out for everybody. But now he gets his chance to actually pitch in a Grapefruit League game. And he is ejected from that game and then goes out to the bullpen to try and continue because he needs to get to his pitch count. Like that's still work he needs to do. And Angel Hernandez like goes out there and says, "No, you can't throw in the bullpen. I've ejected you from the game." So Ollie Marmol gets ejected and they like walk off the field together. Ollie and Lance Lynn with his glove on his head. That was classic. So I don't know if you had any thoughts about that, but I thought it was pretty good.
Okay, I did see that. And even though I do think Angel Hernandez is horrible, I liked that because it was interesting, and it's such
Right.
an Angel Hernandez thing to do, and Lance Lynn is also, like, the one ornery guy that he would
Yeah.
do it too, and then, of course, we all know these are exhibition games, and the guys have to get their work, and, hey, by the way, again, I like to be 100% honest in terms of not watching all these games. Do guys still run their polls during the game? Because that was something growing up I always laughed at. That during the spring training games, you would have dudes getting the pitchers getting their work in and running polls during the game, which I always found funny because we all know that on the backfields, there's just tons of fields and space. Do they still do that?
I don't think I've seen anybody doing that on a field during a game or in the stadium. No.
But you
I don't
remember
think
that,
that's
right? Back in the day?
vaguely. I mean, my day was maybe different than your day, Charlie, so I don't know if, it's a little bit of an age gap there, you know?
How old are you?
29. I'll turn 30 this summer.
Oh, nice. Okay, so I'm 41. I'll be 42. You'll be 30. So I'm 12 years
A
older. Okay,
dozen years, man.
that is. You know what? We are kind of different. We are
You're
kind of
kind of
different generations. I'm a
you're coming
millennial.
up.
So what are you? What are you?
I don't know if I'm tail end of millennials or the beginning of whatever the next thing is. I don't believe in generations either, so that's like a whole other thing. Because like
I get
you could
that.
say, well, what are you? Like, well, if they tell me I'm the same thing as you, I'd say no, there's a lot of differences in us growing up a dozen years apart in age. And so it's kind of hard to group it that way. That's a podcast for another day. I'm sure you have a channel. If all with all your channels, you have a channel where that podcast would go.
Well, I have discussed this before. I agree with you in this sense. Sometimes, and we'll go off on a quick tangent.
Love it.
Sometimes, like millennials, they've cut it off where it starts at 1980, which
Right.
I don't think makes any sense because I was born in 82. My older brother Sam was born in 79. So technically he's in a different generation, but we had the exact same upbringing because
Right.
it shouldn't be based on arbitrary years. It should be based on technological advances. And to me, I didn't grow up with a smartphone or social media. That was the big change. That was the disruption. So, myself and my older brother are way more like growing up than folks who were maybe 5 years younger than me, but had a smartphone and had Facebook, let's say,
Right.
in their teenage years.
Right. And I just Googled it. It says 81 to 96 is millennial. I'm 94. So they would say, yeah, we're both in the same. But like you said, you and I had completely different upbringings regarding, what was going on in the world, technology being a big thing there. So that's exhibit A of why I'm like, I don't even pay attention when people ask the generation question because I'm like, it's all fake. They just made it up.
Okay, so this might have gone out of style 10 years ago and I forgot. But people who are watching this podcast or listening will remember that back in the day in Grapefruit League games, the pitchers used to run polls on the warning track during the games. That was a thing. I just don't remember when it stopped.
Right. Yeah. I don't really remember it. It might be one of those things where like I say, oh yeah, I remember it just because I've heard somebody talk about it. But did I ever actually see it? I don't know that I did. I
Okay.
don't know.
On that note, what were we talking about? Because I
You
don't
asked me
remember.
about no, I remember. You asked me about the pitchers, kind of you read their box scores, which was really enthralling. I'm glad you did that. And then I was gonna say what I thought about those guys. So Lance Lynn, whatever. I think he's gonna be what he's gonna be, almost regardless of spring performance. And like you said, so minimal of what we've seen, partially thanks to Angel Hernandez, that it's hard to draw any conclusions. Um, It'd be nice to see some good things from Steven Matz, I think, but the main thing is getting him healthy and having him be healthy when the season begins. But you remember the beginning of last year, he pitched so poorly that they took him out of the rotation. So having results for him would be kind of nice to see. I don't know. The one I want to ask you about is Kyle Gibson. He's been getting kind of shelled into oblivion just a little bit. His first outing was like back-to-back homers against the Nationals, and that was how he began his Grapefruit League with the Cardinals. So his ERA is to the roof. I get it. Are you worried about that for a guy that's 36 years old and also like had kind of a high ERA last year? So you kind of, with what you're getting with Kyle Gibson, it's like he will throw 30 plus starts. His ERA will be 5, and that is what you are getting. And that's kind of what the Cardinals paid him to do. I don't think they paid Kyle Gibson thinking he's suddenly going to be like a 3.5 ERA guy this year. That wouldn't have been particularly prudent. And I know that's probably part of why Cardinals fans were underwhelmed by the offseason and what they did in the rotation because they sensed a lack of upside and more like, okay, stability on the floor, that's great, but this doesn't feel good if a guy's going to go out and get beat up every fifth day. So what are you worried about Kyle Gibson? I'm gonna just kind of shove the question in your direction because I don't really have a great read on how I should feel about this right now.
Okay, my short answer is kind of, and here's why. I think you'll appreciate this as a fantasy baseball guy.
Okay.
I think sometimes you can think about these pitchers in terms of fantasy baseball, and I usually think of this with guys in the postseason. I think about it. Do I feel good about that guy starting a postseason game? I kind of think about it in the fantasy lens. There are guys that you're going to start no matter what. There are guys that suck. There are guys in the middle, and sometimes you have to start them, but you know there's a very good chance they could give up 7 earned runs. And I was trying to Google this right as you were asking my question because I knew what you were getting to. I also have this image in my head. I think it was a couple years ago. Didn't Kyle Gibson give up an insane amount of homers consecutively? Was it
he,
4?
he might have.
And all I'm saying is, I'm not trying to knock Kyle Gibson. I think he's a very nice, solid, middle to end of the rotation pitcher at this point in his career. I think with a guy like that, there's going to be some games where he gives it up like prom night. I think there's going to be some games where he's good, but correct me if I'm wrong. I was trying to see it.
No,
Didn't
you're
he
not
do
wrong.
something?
It happened
What
against
was
the
it?
Cardinals too. It
Okay, so
was
yeah, what was it?
Nolan Arenado, Nolan Gorman, Juan Yepes, and Dylan Carlson were the history-making crew as each connected for a long ball against Philly starter Kyle Gibson. That was July of 2022, beginning of July
Okay,
22nd.
you know, it's funny. I forgot it was the Cardinals. I figured it was 2 years ago. Maybe that's implanted in my brain that if any guy can give up 4 straight homers,
Dang it,
I'm
Charlie.
never I'm sorry. I'm never gonna feel just really great. So, I don't know, like, I don't have high expectations. If Lynn, Matz, Michaelis, and Gibson, if their ERAs are all around 4, 4.5, I think that's okay. I
That'd
don't
be a
know if
win.
that guarantees I don't know if that guarantees them a playoff spot. If Sonny Gray, if his ERA is closer to 3, if everybody else gives you healthy starts and you're around 4 to 4.5, I think the Cardinals can sneak in. So I don't know if I answered your question. I think Kyle Gibson is who he is. He had a really nice win-loss record last year. I don't think his win-loss record will be the same, but he very well could be the same kind of pitcher, which is 4 ERA, gives you innings, nice, solid, dependable guy, but you'd never feel great starting him in a postseason game. Is that fair?
Yeah, and I think the ERA was closer to 5, right? Like 4.7 was the ERA last year. It's kind of he's like 4.6, 4.5 for his career. That's kind of around what he is. And so I agree with the sentiment. He's going to be what he is. But that is going to maybe mean some of those games are going to be like 6 innings and 6 runs. Like he might get you
Yes.
the innings you were looking for, but that's how the ERA balloons. But if that's the
Yes.
case, there should also be a hefty dose of 6 innings, 2 runs that are games you're going to feel good about, and he can get a win in those games if the offense does its job. So like that's going to be one that's interesting. And then with other guys like Lance Lynn, I'm going to want to know like what's his velocity at because he throws only fastballs predominantly. And so if the velocity is solid, you're like, okay, this can work. But if the velocity is 89 and he's only throwing fastballs, you're like, he's going to really have to mix his pitches well and hit his spots, or there are going to be days where he sort of gets beaten up a little bit. So there is risk there with this Cardinal rotation. I don't think there's the perception of a ton of upside. And so I think that's why Cardinals fans are a little bit, they're feeling a little bit iffy about things. And I get that the way they've built this team, and I think you're right. If they're all four, even if all four of them pitch 30 times and are 4.5 ERA, I still think that can be enough because I do have faith in the bullpen to be pretty good. But then you're going to have to say, is this offense top 10, top 8, or top 5? Like it might have to be top 5. And with the health issues, that could be a question as well. So they're before we even get to game one, I do feel like they're teetering a little bit. Like today, how many wins would you predict? I think we've always been in that mid 80s kind of range, but have the injuries and the way this has started taken you to a lower number, or have the issues for the rest of the NL Central made you go, this is just going to end up with the Cardinals finding a way to get there? How do you land on that? I guess.
Well, and we'll get to the Devin Williams thing because that wraps into what you said. I still am right around. I think Pacoda might have it right now
Ooh.
with the 85. But again, to me, remember, like everything can change at the trade deadline.
Right.
Everything can change. If you suck, you're going to suck more. If you're in it, all of a sudden that could be 90 if they add. To me, I just have a real hard time with this Cardinals team because I think one of the things is they're never bad, and they were bad last year, and you wonder, were they really that bad? I've said a million times, you never start Wayno in any of those games. They didn't care for the second half basically after the trade deadline the last couple months. So I still am probably 84, 85. I do think these injuries chip away a little bit here and there. But again, if they're in it at the deadline, they probably add a starter and they add a reliever, and then 88, 89 wins wouldn't surprise me. Um, what I was going to say though is you brought this up with the pitching staff, and I think this is interesting, and I think this could make Ali Marmol's job a lot easier. I think last year was the perfect storm where the pitching sucked, and so Ali had to make all these tough decisions, especially early in the game.
Right.
And we would critique them, but it's never a good decision if you're, oh, should I pull this guy in the fourth? Well, it's because the guy sucks. I also think Ali maybe is a little too by the book for me. I think there could be a little more feel there. And this is him just learning to be a big league manager after a couple years. So you brought up that there's going to be some games where Gibson and probably Lynn, they go six, they allow five,
Yeah.
four. Hell, maybe in a bad game it's six, but maybe the game is 5-4 at that point, 6-5, whatever it is. And I think it makes sense for Ollie to let those guys pitch their six. I think that takes a lot of tough decisions off Ollie's plate. Hopefully, you're still in these games. If you're down a run and you let Lynn leave the game and it's 5-4 or 4-3, whatever it is, you still have a lot of time to make it up. And I think that makes Ollie's decision making better if you allow these veteran pitchers to throw their 6 innings, even if their ERAs are going to be 4.6.
Yep, and they can yell at me if I'm speaking for them and I'm wrong about this, but I think that's exactly how they view it. Like that's precisely nail on the head, exactly how they see it. In last year, and I can't remember even when I asked Ollie this question. I think it was somewhere in the offseason, and it was to the and I forget specifically what his answer was, but I remember sort of the gist of it, which was like you had those sorts of decisions last year, and you did tend to pull guys early with some level of frequency. Does part of that decision process have to do with knowing the pitchers and kind of believing what you can get out of them? And how does that compare to now? You have these guys who we're kind of trumpeting as their workhorses. They go 6, 7, like that's what they're built to do. That's what they're expected to do. They know that and they embrace that. And he basically was like, "Yep, that's exactly it." Like that's why you couldn't necessarily do it with last year's group because look at last year's group. Look at the players he had on that rotation, even guys like Jack Flaherty, who right now is looking great with Detroit in spring, but he wasn't that last year. He was talking about the art of pitching and throwing 91 like that. They didn't have the guys where you want a manager to let him go, right?
Right.
And inevitably on a Tuesday in June, there's going to be a guy who's going well and he throws five and he's at 82 pitches, but his track record's not great. And so when Ollie pulls him because the third time through the order's coming up and he's got bad numbers analytically against that handedness of batters and their 1, 2, 3 of the opposing lineup, and they make that move, fans go crazy because they don't maybe have the bullpen coverage to do it. He was damned if he did, damned if he didn't last year. That's kind of my view on it because the bullpen wasn't quite good enough to cover for the starters that just weren't going very deep. And the starters weren't good enough to be trusted to go much deeper because they just weren't consistently getting the job done. So I completely agree that that's a big crux of what the Cardinals are hoping they're going to be allowed to do this year. But these pitchers have to do it. Like they gave them 12 million, 13 million bucks a piece to do it. Can Lynn and Gibson do that? Can they actually in practice make that happen and make that easier on Ollie Marmol by pitching through some of the issues that they might encounter early in games and getting you into the seventh inning despite having given up 4 or 5 runs? Like that's going to be the test of whether this model that they've built for the 2024 season actually works.
Yeah, I know you and I have quasi debated this once before, but I
Not the
do
giddy
want to
thing.
say,
Oh, okay.
no, that in terms of what he gave the Cardinals, I know he sucked with the Orioles once he was traded. But
Yeah.
to me, Jack Flaherty's numbers and production with the Cardinals weren't much different than what Kyle Gibson did. I understand that Flaherty was bad once he was traded. Um, but Like Flaherty, they kind of had the same numbers. I know Gibson had a great win-loss record
Right.
last year, but in terms of kind of what you got, that's why I always like to wonder, like, how much better did they get? If you're essentially trading. I've said this a thousand times. I'll go quick, but you're kind of replacing Monty with Sonny Gray, which I think is fair. You're kind of
Right.
replacing Kyle Gibson. Excuse me, Jack Flaherty with Kyle Gibson, and then Wayno was horrible. Let's be honest. We all love Wayno, but he was horrible. And you're replacing him with Lance Lynn, who could be pretty good. So there's the big upgrade,
Right.
in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think that is accurate. And I've looked at this before too when it comes to Flaherty versus Kyle Gibson because all right, the thing with Flaherty was he had several games last year, and I'm trying to make sure which of them were with the Cardinals because some of them were with the Orioles, but several games where he would not get you through 5 innings. Like at least it feels like at least a handful, maybe more with the
Hmm.
Cardinals, where he was not, he was getting shelled and he was also not able to get you deeper into games. So I was like, well, I wonder how often Kyle Gibson had that. And you kind of go back and look, and it's like, well, he had maybe a similar number, maybe not quite as many instances of that as Flaherty over the full season, but it's going to happen to him at times too. So that's where I think it is a little bit interesting that I don't know that you got a ton better. Ideally, Kyle Gibson goes out there and he's the best version of himself. He's had years where he's been much better than he was last year, but generally he's going to kind of hover around what he's always been. I think you're right, though. Lance Lynn replacing Wayno, Lynn could be there too. I mean, we'll see what Michaelis ends up doing. I just think there's more upside for Lynn if he's on to strike guys out, which is always going to make your life easier as a pitcher. And so he could end up being a little bit better than Michaelis. Like I'm thinking again about that playoff rotation. But there's the other side where if Lynn's velocity's not there and he's, not able to dot up his pitches and his spots the way he needs to, he could be your five that you're going, man, this is kind of the guy that we saw him be last year and we signed him anyway. Like very, very wide range of outcomes, I feel like, for Lynn and obviously for Matt's too, because we've seen various versions of him when healthy over the last couple of years.
Yeah, and I don't want to belabor this point, but also with Flaherty, I do think there was the one outing, and I just found it here against the Angels, where he
That's the
gave up a
one.
10 spot. He gave up
Yep.
a 10 spot and 2 1/3. So also, I think I'm not saying I'm going to do a Steve Spagnuolo. If you take away the 85-yard touchdown run, you can't take that out. But
Great.
that particular outing absolutely destroyed his ERA. It's kind of like remember the Randy Choate game years ago where
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
he threw 1 inning for every game, but then, like, 1 game, Mike Matheny left him in, and he gave up 8, and his ERA never recovered for the rest of his life.
Yes, that is, that is pretty much what happened. Where when was that? The game against the Angels was in May.
It was
And his
early.
ERA, yeah, Flaherty's ERA was like sub 4 before that game, and he spent the rest of the year trying to get it back down. So I don't know
Oh,
what
look at this.
the number would have
I'm
been, but
sorry. I'm sorry to interrupt, but look at who wrote the article. That was you. Wait, my ring light is
oh
Brendan
yeah.
Schaeffer.
Okay, there you
Brendan
go.
Schaeffer.
Well,
Oh,
that is
Brendan
Jack Flaherty.
Schaeffer,
I'll
KMOV.
I'll take your word
Uh,
for it.
no, it says Cardinals suffer second consecutive sweep as Angels bombard Flaherty for 10 runs. That was by Brendan Schaeffer on May 4th of 2023 at 3:59 p.m. Central
That
Time. He
was a
posted that
toughie.
article.
That was a tough one.
That was a rough one. Okay, so all right, let's move on from that. And Devin Williams, St. Louis area guy, Hazelwood. I've talked to him multiple times. Great dude. I remember doing a story on him when he was drafted at his workout facility. I think that was 2013. I talked to him a couple years ago when I was still in TV, did a nice interview. Cool guy. Bad news for him. Jeff Passan's tweet from last night.
Yeah.
So Devin Williams, 2 stress fractures in his back, expected to miss around 3 months, sources tell ESPN. Williams pitched through back soreness in September, but it returned earlier this spring. He'll rehab and should return by midseason. And again, it's just it sucks because we like Devin Williams, and you want to see. I mean, he's amazing. His
Yeah, he's
changeup is just absolutely
ridiculous.
sick.
Yeah.
So, but also it's the Brewers. You just keep nicking away. Corbin Burns already traded. You have amazing closer, one of the best relievers in baseball, with Devin Williams. I mean, are the Brewers going to be there now when they have another big time injury? The Central, it's kind of always there for the taking for the Cardinals. And it looks like, Cardinals Cubs, we'll see if the Reds make a step. But the Cardinals, I feel like, will at least just fall into second place, at least based on just the other team's rosters.
Yeah, I mean, we kind of thought that last year though too. But I agree. Like that should be the way that it shakes out. And I would have had I don't know, Milwaukee's the toughest team to figure because I think mentally everybody's looking at the Corbin Burns trade and going, "Uh-oh, they're basically tanking. They're giving it up. But I think that was more isolated to they didn't think they could sign Burns. They were right. He was pissed at him from the arbitration stuff, and they probably didn't want to pay him what he was going to cost anyway. So they made the trade, got what they could for him. But really, the rest of their roster is somewhat intact. They've got Jackson Churio that they gave the big contract to. That he's never played a game, but he's going to. Is top prospect for them. They signed Reese Hoskins, which I think is an underrated ad at first base. So like, I think they're going to be okay. I would have had them, 81, 82 wins maybe with Devin Williams. So maybe they're like 79. I don't know. They really do a nice job though of producing random relievers that you didn't know were good until you look up and they've got 50 strikeouts in 30 innings. You're like, who is this guy?
Mhm.
So I think they're going to still be like in that soft, cushy around 500. The Reds, as we've talked about, are to me very dependent on the young pitchers that are going to line their rotation, stepping up and kind of taking that next step. I think the Reds are still going to be threatening. And then the Cubs, they're going to be right in that range too. I think all four teams are really close. And it's great that Pacoda says Cardinals are at 84.6. Everybody else is between like 78, 79, 81. That's nice. That makes you feel good going into the season. But I really don't know that there is that level of separation until the Cardinals show it on the field. They did lose 90 some odd games last year. So they got to figure that out.
Okay, so because you mentioned Corbin Burns, I want to make sure that Burns looks like he did change to being a Scott Boras guy last March.
Okay.
And so I had this conversation earlier today. I was on Hot Take Central, of course, which you're also a part of, 590 The Fan, 590thefan.com. And we were kind of talking about the need for the Cardinals to add that front end pitcher with Sonny Gray and how you get it. And we started the conversation with Dylan Cease because obviously Dylan Cease gets traded to the Padres. There was a lot of talk of the Cardinals potentially being interested in Dylan Cease. And my thought was, well, if you don't get a Dylan Cease or a Logan Gilbert, what's the market look like next year? And I thought it was actually worse than it is. There's more names than I thought. But look, Blake Snell, Jordan Montgomery, this was a pretty good class. Those guys are still available, obviously. This was a pretty good class of pitchers out there with Yamamoto, with Aaron Nola, who didn't leave, but Shohei Otani. So next year, so Shane Bieber, I'm not giving him a big contract with what I've seen from him as he's aging, strikeouts down, velocity down, whatnot. Corbin Burns strikes me as the guy who's going to get the absolute biggest amount of money.
Yeah.
Boris guy, he's not to me a Cardinals match. Max Fried is the guy that kind of, we always do this, feels like a Cardinal. Everybody else, how about, Kyle Hendricks feels like a Cardinal. Then there's all the older guys with the opt outs, and Max Scherzer's there. Doesn't it make sense? Doesn't it feel like Max Scherzer finally ends up with the Cardinals when he's, 44 years old, whatever
If
it is?
if he's healthy, he certainly might. He's
Right.
out till midseason or whatever it is, but that's possible. Like, I don't know if he's going to be wanting to still pitch. Depends on how this year goes, probably for him. I could see it. Kyle Hendricks feels very Cardinals-y because he's 34, so that that goes right in line with what you're looking for. Max
So,
Fried would be the one that's interesting and also like he's good and not old,
yes,
so you could see a longer
that's
term deal.
right. That's the one. Like, I almost feel like it's funny you say Kyle Hendricks, but to me, Kyle Hendricks is going to replace either Lynn or Gibson. So if they were to get Kyle Hendricks,
This is
but to
such a
me,
sad state of affairs, but keep
no,
going.
it is. But my point was, if the Cardinals, in my opinion, really want to win in the next 2, 3 years, whatever it is, and of course they want to win, but to be able to win, I think you got to match somebody with Sonny Gray. And I don't think there's any chance of Corbin Burns and, Garrett Cole has an opt out, Verlander vesting option, Walker Bueller, ace like he's always hurt. Again, Max Fried is the one that jumps out. And I'm just throwing that out there. There's a bunch of names, but eventually the Cardinals need two front end guys, and it's really hard to get the other one. But Dylan Cease was moved, so we can't say anymore. Oh, he wasn't traded. He was moved, and I saw what the top prospect was, it like number 85. I know they gave up four guys, but
The headliner was Drew Thorpe, but what
yeah,
you have to realize is the Cardinals don't have a Drew Thorpe. You can't look at number 85 and go, well, the Cardinals have somebody above number 85, so they should have been able to do this deal. It's not at all how it works. They wanted a guy with the skill set that Drew Thorpe has, who's now, I think it was in double A last year and lighting it up, 44 strikeouts in 30 innings with a 1.4 ERA after getting the call up midseason from high A. Um, if I'm looking at the right guy, I think I'm looking at the right guy.
What about Tink?
Well, that's what I was going to say is like you might have a guy that you go, well, this guy's similar. And I believe Thorpe, by the way, the reason I was getting confused is because it was saying New York Yankees. I think he went to San Diego in the Juan Soto deal, and then now is flipped around in this trade for Dylan Cease. So, like, okay, Tink Hens, but how do the White Sox view Tink Hens? We really don't know the answer to that. If the Cardinals were really involved, let's pretend they were, and they were saying, "Hey, we really like Dylan Cease. We want to add him." I don't think that was the case, but let's pretend. And they would say, "Hey, we have this Tink Hens to offer. He's a really good pitcher that can headline the deal." And the White Sox could look at him and go, okay, kind of a smaller build. We haven't really seen him build up and throw a lot of innings yet in the minors. What if maybe he's just kind of going to profile as a future reliever? We really need a guy that profiles as a future ace. I don't know that any of these conversations were had, but it's the only kind of insight that we can glean of we don't really know how certain teams view certain guys. Maybe the White Sox said, look at the Cardinals, man. If we're going to trade with the Cardinals, we're getting one of those stud hitters. We're getting Donovan or Gorman because that's what they have, right? And if the Cardinals were in that conversation, they go, "Well, you're crazy. You're not going to get a Donovan or Gorman level player from somebody else for this guy." And the White Sox can say, "Okay, fine, but that's who we want from you." Like I don't know that these things happen, but I could see that's a little bit more of how it probably works than what's his ranking on the prospect rankings from MLB.com? Well, we got to, it probably doesn't go that way. So that would be the little bit of a frustration there. But you're right. Like let's not just make excuses for the Cardinals. They could have tried to get into the Dylan Cease, situation if they really wanted to, but what would it have cost them? We can't just look at what it cost the Padres and say it would have been identical to what the Cardinals have in their system. That's number one. Number two, how do you get the guy to pair with Sonny Gray? Well, I'll ask the same question you asked. Well, what about Tink? You got to develop somebody at some point. A winning recipe to having multiple frontline aces is not paying all of them. And right now, the Cardinals don't have multiple frontline aces, and yet you look in their rotation, they're paying all of them. All five of them are guys that have free agent contracts or extension. In the case of Miles Michaelis, they're paying the whole group. So this narrative of like Cardinals don't want to pay, it's all they're doing is paying starting pitching because they haven't been able to develop any. This has to be a summer where that changes, where we see one of these guys latch on and know that going into next year, he can be not just, well, maybe that's your number five if there's an injury. Like, no, somebody. I don't know if it's Graceffo, if it's Thompson, if it's Libby, if it's Drew Rom, if it's Tink Hence, if it's Cooper Jerpy. Like, I don't care who it is. They got to start having some of these guys. They drafted all these guys. Can they advance? Michael McGreevy, like, can some of these guys advance to be worth anything, to be able to plug into a rotation and compete and be a number two or at least a number three in a rotation? Or the Cardinals every year are going to have to go out. I mean, we like Randy Flores, but eventually some of these pitchers have got to hit. This is just it's been kind of a while, and that is what's holding the Cardinals back. Not their inability or their unwillingness to spend. They're spending, but they're having to kind of toe that line because if you throw out multiple 5, 6 year deals to starting pitchers and one or both of them get hurt, you are the Phillies of 2011 when Ryan Howard tears the Achilles and then like, oh, that was the last moment that they were relevant and it was all downhill from there. And then it's a, 5, 6 year rebuild. Like the Cardinals are trying to avoid putting themselves in that spot. So is their spending kind of savvy and penny pinchy and annoying? Absolutely. But you could be more effective with the way you spend if you didn't have to fill 5 spots every time. Like they got to have somebody developed that can get in that rotation and pitch on the minimum for a couple years. So then you can allocate your resources effectively around that.
Yeah, I agree with you 1000%. I've said the same thing a million times, but Tink is not close. If he's the guy, maybe next year, but from an inning standpoint, maybe really a workhorse in 2026. And
Yeah.
so
If
my
ever.
point is, I agree with you 1000%. That's the teams that were great for the Cardinals from 11 to 15 had all those pitchers, not just starters, but relievers, the Rosenthals, the Wakas, the Carlos Martinez's, Lance Lynn, Shelby Miller for a while, Kevin Segrist. The list goes, I think I said Trevor Rosenthal. The list
Yeah.
goes on and on and on. The reason I brought up a Cease-like player is the Cardinals need to fix that. But if we don't think that guy is here for a couple years, they still need a guy for the next couple years. And that's
Yes.
why I think a Cease-like pitcher could be that guy. But also, we had this conversation, either you and I are on the radio. Dylan Cease, great strikeout guy, career FIP 3.86, career ERA 3.83, one amazing year in 2022 with a 2.2 ERA, but also that 3.8 pitcher, that's a Jordan Montgomery type pitcher. So I'm not some guys are just aces, like boom, that dude's ERA is going to be in the twos or 2.8. Dylan Cease had one really great year, and don't get me wrong, he would be the ace or the number two on the Cardinals 1,000%. But you could also say maybe the Cardinals don't think he's as good as other teams think he is. I don't know. He's pretty damn good. Strikes out a lot of guys. I don't know.
Yeah, and was pitching on that same White Sox team last year where we say, well, Lance Lynn was kind of going through it last year. That team sucked. It was a terrible clubhouse environment, et cetera. Which then I don't even know why I didn't realize this until a couple of days ago, but they didn't fire that guy. They didn't fire the manager that everybody is saying this was the worst clubhouse in the history of the universe, Pedro Grifol or whatever his name is. I just saw like a quote about him talking about some. I'm like, wait a minute, he's still there? They had literally everybody come out and say, "Yep, I've never seen a clubhouse this bad. We all did whatever we wanted." And they didn't fire him. I don't know why. I just assumed. I guess I assumed and missed that nugget that he was still there. But my point being, the 4.5 ADRA for Cease last year was maybe in a team environment that wasn't so good. He was still striking out a bunch of dudes, kind of like what Lance Lynn did for them. And maybe Dylan Cease goes to a better team and kind of reverts back to maybe not the 2.2 version of himself, but like a little bit closer to his career norms. And the fact that the strikeouts never went away is encouraging. So I do think Dylan Cease is really good, but I wouldn't have given up Brendan Donovan for him. Like Tink Hens, I would have. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
don't know if the White Sox are interested in that. They might have more faith in Drew Thorpe, right? So that's where it gets a little bit tricky. But you're right. They need a guy. And I don't know the answer to getting one if it's not paying somebody. If we go through 2024 and none of these guys who you got like 8 to 10 names you could point to, the guys they traded for at the deadline, Tekoa Roby. Like you've got a bunch of names. Can somebody emerge? Other teams have it happen all the time. Other teams have, who's this? Where did he come from? Oh, now he's an ace. Like Cardinals need one of those. It's time. It's time for one of those to fall into their lap. But that doesn't happen by magic. Like they have to develop them. The player's got to have the drive. He's got to have the determination, and he's got to go out and do it and have the right coaching and leadership, et cetera. So like it's not going to fall out of the sky for them. But man, it would be nice if it could.
Well said. You said it's time, and I think it might be time to end the show. Is that okay?
Oh,
We're we're
I think that
we're
is okay.
over. We're over 50 minutes. I did make some notes on the back of a piece of paper,
That's good.
and I think I hit on all of them there.
Look at that.
So, what did I miss? Is there anything else? We always like to say, Brendan, empty your notebook.
Don't tell, I'm not at spring anymore. I have no notebook. There's nothing to empty. I barely can watch the games when sometimes they're not even on. It's going to be a lot better when we get to the season. The notebook will be a little more full. But for right now, no, we're watching Victor Scott. I keep talking about that being the thing because I think the Cardinals should put him on the like. You think they should put him on the roster? Where are you at? Like opinion, not like give me the wishy washy. But what do you think they should do?
Well, at this point, yes, because of the injury issues, and that means he might only be up for a week or two.
But do
But
you worry about that tanking his
no,
development?
no.
If he
So
comes up and goes back down.
no. So I actually we discussed this on Hot Take Central this morning, and I said this, and I understand that narrative, and I do agree with the development of position players, which is why in the past, going back to the Dave Duncan era, if you had a guy that you thought was going to be a future big league starter, they did this with so many people, Wayno, that first year, use him out of the pen. You can kind of manage his innings. He gets a taste of the big leagues. Boom, he's a starter next year. I totally understand that if you're a position player and you're a prospect and a future starter, a future position player starter, you don't want that guy playing twice a week with a pinch hit here or there. So if there weren't injuries, I would say Victor Scott, stay in the minors. And my point was this. Now, if Victor Scott stayed up in the big leagues all season and played twice a week, I think that would be horrible.
Right.
If he gets a cup of coffee for a week or two, if he's good, he's bad, he's in between. If he can't deal with the failure of a couple weeks in the big leagues, then I don't think he's going to be a good player anyway. So
I
if that
completely agree.
if
I
that
don't like the
breaks you,
narrative either. Yeah.
and by the way, that is not specific to Victor Scott. I don't know the dude. I'm saying in general, if 2 weeks of failure in the big leagues breaks a player, that player probably is not mentally strong enough to be a really good big league player.
And I have no doubt that Victor Scott is the opposite of that. Like the way that they talk about him, getting to hear him speak at winter warm up too was kind of like the first integration where everybody gets a chance to see what he's about, and just the way he answers questions, and you can tell he thinks through things and talked about his upbringing and the way that he was kind of raised to kind of be analytical. And I think kinesiology even said was like his field of study in college. So like this is a guy who is smart and again, smart guys have been, chewed up and spit out by MLB before. I get it. But I look at Victor Scott and I'm like, I don't know. I don't, it's just call it a gut feeling, whatever you want to call it. We all are going to have our various opinions on whether or not that's something that could be damaging to a guy. My opinion is that it won't be with this player. And I'm perfectly comfortable with him coming up, even if it's for 3 weeks. And if it's for 3 weeks and he's good, he's not ever going back. So that's the other side of that. If it's 3 weeks and he has a Mason win like OPS, that he had in September of last year, they can send him down and then he can learn from that. But nobody's looking at Mesa Win right now going, Cardinals ruined him by bringing him up. He wasn't ready. Nobody's saying that because it's not true. I mean, maybe 10 years we could go, well, Mason Win never panned out. And maybe it will have been. But like, I just don't, I'm agreeing with you. I don't personally subscribe to that narrative. So we get to end the show on an agreeing tone. That's good.
But one more thing, I'm going to make
Uh
one
oh.
more football analogy because
Sure.
here's where what's the old football analogy? On the road in the playoffs, defense travels, run game travels, whatever you want to say. Tough weather. I'm making a football analogy.
I like it.
Victor Scott, speed is always there. Speed kills. If you're not having a fantastic week, bat to ball, you can slap a ball around, get an infield hit. You can bunt a ball here, get an infield hit. Defense, your speed in the outfield, that usually doesn't slump. So, again, I don't know if he's going to consistently hit at the big league level, but when you're super, super fast, there's a lot you bring to the table all the time. I mean, even pinch running, again, slapping the ball around, playing defense, that's something you can't teach, and it's always there.
I want to see a day this week where he goes 0 for 3 and strikes out a couple times and has to go in the field, and like the Cardinals will get a good glimpse at how does he handle that. You say, defense doesn't slump. It shouldn't. So like how does a young player handle a little bit of failure at the plate? Does he go out and low fit the field, or does he make a diving catch? Does he help out his pitching staff? Let's ask the Cardinals rotation. You're worried about the Cardinal rotation maybe not being up to snuff? Let Victor Scott go out there and be in center field. He's going to save them runs. He's going to save them potentially games with what he can bring to the table in center field, getting the balls in the gaps, making plays. He would be my day one center fielder. Unless Dylan Carlson goes on a tear, and I like Dylan Carlson, man. I want him to have that confidence to play with it. I might like him more than you do. I don't know. You're laughing. But that would be the one thing where I say, look, if Dylan Carlson has a 620 OPS today and he ends spring with a 920 OPS, it's because he started to really lock it in. And at that point, I'm back to saying, look, you don't actually have the playing time necessarily to offer Victor Scott every day, unless you're benching Burleson, which they're probably not going to do against right-handed pitching. So that would be the one instance where I would go, maybe not. But if Victor Scott continues to look like this and Carlson doesn't like just stake a claim, Carlson's going to play plenty. There's going to be lots of opportunities to go around. But if there's enough for Victor Scott to kind of be your mainstay in center for that first month or so, whatever it is that Tommy's out, get some run, I'm all for it because I think, too, it can help the vibe of the team. The team knows when there's a guy out there making plays in center and doing things on the bases that can get everybody kind of integrated and pumped up. So I'm all for it. I think he should be their day one center fielder.
And we will end. But I have to say, my favorite saying, to be fair, or to be clear, I have nothing against Dylan Carlson. I just, until he proves it to me, I no longer view him as a major league starting player. Now, whether he's a fourth outfielder, he could be good. I'm just saying, I no longer have those expectations for him until he proves it. Is that fair?
Yeah, I mean, it's just the consistency against right-handed pitching, but he had a 780 OPS in 2021. Like that, I know that we're talking about 3 years ago at this point, but like that's really good. And I think he's a good athletic defender too. So I think certainly can be an everyday, but like figure out against right-handed pitching. He's been a switch hitter his whole life. A lot of Cardinals fans would say, stop switch hitting. It's like that's what he's always done. As the Cardinals, do you feel that way internally? And how do you relate that to a player that may already kind of feel like he's on the outs because they're not giving him playing time? Like it's a delicate balance, but at the end of the day, you're right. He just has to go out and do it, and that'll clear everything up.
Look at that. We snuck over an hour, even though, I pressed record. I don't remember when we started. So whenever I shut up, it
It's gonna
might
be
be
close.
exactly. an hour. But
Getting
great
close.
show, Brendan. Low hanging fruit, whatever the hell episode this was. One of these days, we are going to make it up and do two in a week. And again, when the season starts,
We can do
hell,
more.
we'll do a bunch if people are liking it. So, Brendan, thank you. Be Shafe Daily. Follow him. Subscribe
That's right.
on YouTube, KMOV.
YouTube.com/at bschafer12. Subscribe.
There you go.
Charlie steals all the videos. I need some love.
Charlie's been doing all NASCAR. Charlie's allowing an opening for yourself and Jim Hayes and all these new Cardinals creators because Charlie's balls to the wall
No.
NASCAR.
It's been a
Well,
year almost that I've been doing
okay,
this.
but new-ish. I didn't say that as a pejorative. Okay, I'm
I
just
think it
saying.
was a little bit of a pejorative.
No, we're all. Hey, look, I was
It's
talking
like
to Jim
saying the
about this.
Democrats, right? Oh, now we've gone political. Uh-oh.
No, just real quick. I I tweeted that wrong.
You
I
did?
don't agree with this. Somebody was saying that saying the Democrat Party instead of the Democratic Party was a
Oh,
pejorative.
okay.
And I said, even if that's the case, I don't think most people at all view it as that.
Right. Okay, because that's you tweeted like if you call someone the Democrats, then that would be the pejorative, but it was the party name. Okay.
I
Well, we talked
put
about that all last Friday too on
I
the show.
put that in there and I was wrong about that. What on the radio you did?
Yeah, on Hot Take Central.
Yeah,
We
that
talk
was
about you all the
a
time.
couple
I
of
hear
weeks
you
ago.
like that. You like that when we talk about you when you're not there?
Oh, you
That's
guys
what I
talk
heard.
about me, yeah. I feel like should I still get paid when I'm not there if I'm always the subject
Definitely
of
not. You could just listen though, and then you would know what's going on. But
I'm busy. All
yeah,
right. On that note, now we're definitely over an hour.
we did
Brendan,
it.
thank you. Comment, like, subscribe, share the channel, share the videos, share the show, put it in your group text, post it on social media. Let's grow this bad boy. Brendan, see you, buddy. Peace out.
Bye.